In the blue hydrangea grand hall of East Hampton Country Club, where jazz glided softly, a sentence sliced the air. By the sealed directive of Mr. Henry Sterling, I am compelled to read the real prenup, right now. The room went quiet. Paper rustled, a seal thumped onto the table, and Vivian sprang up, choked for words. "Reggie, stop right now! I am Ava Carter. They call me the poor bride, sticking a prenup into my hand to leave me empty-handed after the wedding. I used to feel very weak, but in that moment my heart was strangely calm, like when someone touches your healed wound. Still sensitive, but no longer bleeding. I looked around. White tablecloths, a faint scent of almond cake. At the microphone, the butler held a leather folio, voice even and clear. Just 15 minutes, and every chair turned toward me. Not because of scandal, but because of an old debt of gratitude few people know. I tell this not to flaunt a victory, but to remind myself, calm is power, kindness has memory, and truth always knows the way back. If you have ever been boxed in by a cheap label, stay with me tonight. We will open that label, fold it, and set it down. You are at Revenge and Resolve, where cracks turn into pathways. Please subscribe to the channel, hit like, share, and tell me where you are watching from. Each of your comments is a hand clasp that helps me keep going. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to tell this story, and for a few more moments of emotional healing. Back to the time 1 week before the rehearsal night. Queen's mornings in Queens usually begin with the sound of trains running past the classroom window and slanting streaks of sunlight across the board. I work in elementary education at a small school at the head of the street. In my fabric tote there are always a few workbooks, Sharpie markers, a few sticks of white chalk wrapped in tissues so they won't get dusty. I eat half a bagel spread with cream cheese on the stoop, take a sip of ice-filled cold brew, listen to the neighborhood waking up. The sound of roll-up doors, soft street calls, children's laughter. Those very small things are like a compass keeping me steady before each new day. I love Ethan Sterling, the rich but gentle young man whose eyes always seem to be thinking about how he can help. He works at an investment fund in Midtown. His meeting schedule is packed, his tie always a bit askew because of the rush. Ethan is sincere, kind, just a bit overly obedient to his mother. Mrs. Vivian, the exact country club queen type, speaks softly, but with the weight of a red seal. I don't hate her. I just learn to breathe more slowly when I hear her comments about the wedding dress, the bouquet, or which table the in-laws should sit at. My small apartment is on the 3rd floor. On the fridge, the bridal shower invitation is held by a whale-shaped magnet. Pale pink paper, my name written in blue ink. I also keep a photo printed from my phone. Sterling House in East Hampton, gray tiled roof looking out to the sea, a lawn smooth as the folds of an evening gown. Every time I look at the picture, I see a very distant world, not because of money, but because of its silent rules. I tell myself, if one day I set foot there, I will still be myself, still eat a morning bagel, still carry the old tote, still use chalk to write round letters for the students. At school, I write lesson plans with a felt-tip pen with the familiar smell of ink. The children run into the classroom chasing around a backpack with superhero patterns, leaving the smell of white chalk and laughter like the wind. I teach them to read a short passage, ask, "How does your heart feel today?" and receive answers that need no lipstick. I'm a little worried about the test. I'm happy because my mom baked. I sit down at eye level, nod. Thank you for telling the truth. The way I heal myself starts from there, from allowing others to be honest, then learning to be honest with myself. At recess, Ethan texts, "Tonight, Mom wants to review the guest list. I look at my chalk-stained hands, snap a photo, and send back, "I'll call when I'm done with class." I don't want to turn love into censorship. I want it to be like this morning's cold brew. Strong, clear, and cool. I know Ethan's world has entry gates with silent codes, but I have other keys. Kindness, patience, and the small habits that keep me upright. When the dismissal bell rings, I close my notebook, put the chalk into my bag, inhale again the lingering smell of Sharpie. Outside the window, Queens is still noisy yet gentle. I gather myself, light as the tote bag, and think. Whether going to East Hampton or anywhere at all, I will carry this morning with me as a reminder. I belong to the real things. And from that real, I will step into unfamiliar rooms without losing myself. A few days later, the signs began small like the offbeat tick of a clock. One Monday morning, the phone screen lit up with a message from Vivian. "We'll handle seating." I replied, "Thank you, Mom. I'll send the seating chart after third period." The read receipt appeared and then went silent. I called several times. The line showed busy, then shut off entirely. It felt like speaking to a velvet-covered wall, soft, but with no way in. I set the phone down on the teacher's desk, took a breath, and returned to the alphabet. But inside, a string was both slack and taut. In the afternoon, while I was grading papers, a delivery person knocked on the apartment door. The package was heavy in the hand, gray cardstock, a corner stamped with a seal. Prenup, Draft V3. A yellow sticky note was lightly attached. Standard for our circle. I smelled new paper and printer's ink, cold like the smell of metal. My heart slowed, like someone who has opened the wrong door. I don't hate the papers. I only fear the way people use them to shift the boundary between us and her. The next day, at the church where the ceremony would be held, we came to see the seating. My mother wore a green coat, arms holding a small bouquet. She smiled, carefully sat in the middle rows. Vivian approached, a smile thin as a blade. "Please sit in the back row for me, so the VIP guests have a view." Her hand placed on my mother's shoulder, pressing lightly, polite enough that no one could fault it, but enough to make my whole body burn. I looked at Ethan. He fumbled. "Mom, could you slow down a little? I've asked an independent lawyer to review for Ava. I take responsibility." Vivian turned her head, her voice like poured honey. "Sweetheart, love is cute. As for assets, they need signatures." I heard the word cute fall onto the tiled floor like a pebble that breaks the surface of a lake. Then she added, light as a breeze, "If she needs it, we'll sponsor a lawyer for her." A kind sentence with a sharp point. That night, I opened the prenup draft. The lines were dense, the subclauses tangled. I am not a lawyer, but I know how to read my feelings. I saw a woman reduced to clauses. I folded the papers, turned off the light, sat by the window. Outside, Queens breathed steadily. I placed my hand on my chest, counted the beats. 1, 2, 3. I remembered the children in my class, remembered how they say, "I'm scared," and still bravely raise their hands to read. I wanted to be that brave too, to say, "I am not comfortable, this is my mother, this is my life." The next morning, I texted Ethan, "I'll have someone review it, and I want to choose the seat for my mother myself." He replied quickly, "I understand. I'll talk to Mom." I knew that wasn't a big promise, but it was a thread tying back together my heart that was coming apart. I carried that thread all day, finished each period, drank the rest of the cold brew whose ice had melted somewhat, and reminded myself, don't let anger turn into an ugly scar. Let it become a protective border. The signs were no longer isolated. They lined up like chairs in a church, leading the way toward an important evening. I chose silence, not because of weakness, but to conserve strength for the moment when I would need to speak loudly. I swallowed my anger until rehearsal night. On the afternoon of the rehearsal, I spread everything out on the table like a teacher preparing a special lesson plan. A thick stack of papers labeled prenup final, an embossed seal on the upper corner. I turned each page, my fingers carrying the scent of fresh ink. The lines of text straight as a ruler. I receive 0% of assets if we divorce. I voluntarily waive the right to support. Their family has the right to choose the place of dispute resolution, the city, the court, even the governing law. And the line that made the air leave my chest: priority for child custody belongs to the Sterling side unless otherwise decided. I heard my heartbeat like chalk tapping on the board. Cock, cock, reminding me that each clause is an empty box with its name erased. Right beside it was an A4 printout of an email from Family Council. Please return signed before dinner. I read it 3 times, not because it was hard to understand, but because I wanted to confirm where my heart was. A message popped up like a rough knock on the door. Vivian. Sign first, then we eat. I took a screenshot, placed it in a folder named Evidence, not to use against anyone, but so I wouldn't lie to myself that everything was just a misunderstanding. As I put the stack of papers into a clear plastic folder, I saw Reggie standing at the threshold of the prep kitchen, still holding the familiar leather notebook. He lowered his voice, polite as always. Miss Ava, I will record everything that happens tonight. Then, as if remembering something, he slipped into my hand a cream-colored envelope, heavier than usual. Its edge trimmed with a silver thread. Open only if they humiliate you. His eyes looked straight, gentle and sad, like a person who has served many generations and understands that sometimes kindness needs a backup door. I tucked the envelope into my tote between the box of chalk and the Sharpie markers, feeling it lie there like a small, quiet stone. At the country club, the hem of my skirt brushed the polished wooden floor. Servers pushed silver trays. The scent of licorice and melted butter drifted lightly around the room. I saw a few staff glance at me as Vivian approached, a smile thin as thread. Sweetheart, where are the papers? Sign, then we sit. Ethan coughed softly, awkwardly casting me a look asking me to wait a little longer. But the whispers had already spread like a cold wind. Poor bride. Standard for their circle. I didn't respond, just nodded. Reggie stood 3 steps away, pen touching the page of his notebook, recording every word. I knew it wasn't only me who heard. The bussers, the sound technician, even the floral coordinator, all were silent witnesses to how a person gets assigned a seat in their own life. I took the final over to the corner of the room, inhaled the smell of paper, exhaled slowly. I remembered this morning's class. The child with trembling hands still finished reading the passage I had said, "Excellent, you were brave." I repeated that sentence to myself. I opened my phone, looked again at the email requesting sign before dinner, looked at the message, sign first, then we eat. Then I put both into my bag, next to Reggie's envelope. For the first time in many weeks, I didn't feel myself shrinking. On the contrary, I felt the outlines around my heart becoming clearer, like a bolder stroke when writing the first letter of a line. I did not come here to wage war. I came to keep my dignity. And if tonight they choose to humiliate me, I already have something to open. Not to strike back, but to light a lamp. I have all the paperwork. But there is also a strange envelope Reggie slipped to me. Open only if they humiliate you. I touched it lightly, like touching a promise that the truth still stands on the side of the one who knows how to stay calm. Rehearsal night. Country club. The banquet hall shone like a summer photograph. Blue hydrangeas arranged into columns, white tablecloths crisp. The jazz band was changing key, then halted. Vivian waved, "Ava, come here." I stepped into the center of the room, lights reflecting on the thin layer of my dress. In her hand was a pen and a stack of prenup papers, the rustle of paper sounding like someone prying open a cold box. She smiled, her voice loud enough for the whole room to hear. "Ava, sign first, so the guests don't have to wait." The bride sighed. "Must still be busy. With envelopes." The air lost oxygen. I heard a spoon tap lightly against a plate. Someone gave a token cough, and then fell silent. Ethan stood beside me, his throat moving but no words coming out. My mother was on the row next to us, her hand holding a small purse, her eyes trying to stay calm like when she taught me to tie my shoelaces as a child. I looked at the pen placed in front of me, a wave rising in my chest mixed between shame and discouragement. I did not want to turn myself into the center of a polite entertainment. I turned toward my mother, placed my hand in hers. Warm, clear. I whispered, "Mom, let's go home." She nodded very lightly, like a breath. We started to walk. Each step sounded absurdly audible on the polished wooden floor. Thock, thock, thock. The band no longer played. No one said anything. The entire room had only the sound of shoes and my heart knocking on the door from inside my ribcage. Near the threshold, I stopped short. From the bottom of the tote, a thought sprang up like a light in a dark tunnel. The envelope Reggie gave. "Open only if they humiliate you." I remembered his eyes, gentle yet resolute, as if reminding that there are times when leaving does not necessarily mean you have preserved yourself. I stood still for a beat, took a deep breath. If I walked out now, my life might be more peaceful for one evening. But those who grant themselves the right to humiliate would only learn that they were right, and I would forever have to explain to my own heart why I did not stand up straight. I turned back. It felt like holding a child's hand in class through a difficult reading. Slow, without trembling. I said to my mother, "Mom, give me 5 minutes. I promise I will keep myself calm." She squeezed my hand, nodded. I stepped back to the middle of the room, borrowed the microphone from the coordinator. "Sorry for the interruption," I said, keeping my voice even. "I want to confirm. I will not sign any papers under public pressure. We are all human, and every person deserves respect." I saw a few eyes lower, a few servers stop their hands. Ethan looked at me as if he had truly seen me. Vivian curled her lip. "Sweetheart, don't overdo it. Sign and then we eat." I did not argue. I opened my bag, took out the cream-colored envelope, placed it on the lectern. My fingers traced the edge of the paper, hearing the soft rasp of the silver thread. I did not open it immediately. I lifted my head to look around the room. The familiar, unfamiliar faces, the chairs lined up straight like judgment. "Before dinner," I said, "there is one thing that needs to be read correctly." I turned to Reggie. He nodded very slightly, as if he had been waiting for this moment. And in that instant, I felt I was no longer the poor bride pushed into the middle of the room. I was the one who held my own dignity, calm, clear, and bright enough to turn back. At the very moment I placed the envelope on the lectern, the edge of the paper still smelling of silver thread, Reggie came closer, his voice just enough for me to hear. "Miss Ava, old Mr. Henry instructed me. The emergency team's report in Central Park 3 months ago confirms you performed chest compressions and gave breaths to save him. He recorded a video of his last wishes and signed a marriage settlement accompanied by a trust, notarized. If tonight you are humiliated, I must present it." The words confirm, notarized sounded dry as paper, but within me a warm beat rose. It turns out the truth still quietly does its work. A shard of memory flared up. The afternoon wind threading through the rows of trees in Central Park. I got out of teaching early, chalk still on my hands. A buzz of people. An old man fell onto the grass. I knelt down, counted beats as I always teach the children. 1, 2, 3. I kept doing chest compressions, calling out, "Stay with us!" When the ambulance arrived, an attendant touched my shoulder. "You did very well." I left, remembering only the smell of damp grass and the siren fading away. I had no idea the old man I once saved was Ethan's grandfather. Back in the banquet hall, Reggie tilted his head to signal. A side door opened. 2 people stepped in. A graying family attorney and a notary carrying a thick ledger and a seal. No one was noisy. They stood upright like markers for the truth to grip onto. Reggie laid several A4 sheets on the table. The emergency team's confirmation, the extract of date and time in Central Park, and the minutes of the video recording with witness signatures. We also had an independent investigator check the cameras in the park area, the lawyer said clearly. The times match. I looked at the red stamps, not because I was enamored of the power of seals, but because I felt my heart no longer had to guess. There are things that, once called by their right names, fear naturally shrinks. I opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter from Mr. Henry, the handwriting shaky but neat. A small USB wrapped in wax paper, and another stack of papers, the top reading, Marriage Settlement and Trust. I glanced at the notary. She nodded. This one was signed and sealed last week. The lawyer continued, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. Mr. Henry left instructions. If Ms. Ava was ever the one who saved his life, then the real settlement must be read first in any related ceremony, to ensure respect. I did not need to understand all the clauses at this moment. What I understood was, someone who has lived long knows how to bind power to kindness. I inhaled slowly. At one end of the room, Vivian slightly furrowed her brow. At the other, Ethan stood straighter, as if he had just remembered what he once loved in me. Calm, that does not make noise. I lightly touched the USB, touched the edge of the handwritten letter, felt the vein at my wrist beat evenly. Investigation, in this moment, was no longer about winning or losing. It was a way to name what had happened, place it on a bright table, so that no one would be distorted into a rumor. I nodded to Reggie. He stepped to the microphone, opened the leather notebook. The notary and the lawyer quietly stood beside like 2 branches of light. I turned down to hold my mother's hand, whispered, "I'm okay." Then looked up, to let the voice of truth begin its work, like saving a heart that has just stopped beating, so it can learn again how to beat calmly in a room full of gazes. Right after that, Reggie opened the folio. The band fell silent as if holding its breath, and in that silence Reggie opened the leather folio. The sound of papers touching softly, then the stamp coming down rang out clearly. Thud, like someone resetting the heartbeat of the room. The notary nodded, handed over a pen. The ink flowed evenly. I looked close at Mr. Henry's handwriting, shaky yet firm, and at the red streak of the seal lightly bleeding along the paper's edge. Reggie spoke in a calm voice, not acrid, just like reading out the names of stars so no one would lose their way. This is the post-wedding marital agreement, post-nuptial trust, drawn up and notarized. From after the ceremony, Ms. Ava holds 30% of the voting rights at the Sterling Family Foundation. I heard a whispering hush cut off like wind meeting a wall. The words hold and rights did not make me proud. They were like a final chair with my name on it, so I wouldn't have to stand leaning against the wall. The next page opened, Reggie read, Sterling House in East Hampton transfers to co-ownership. I briefly saw the green lawn in the photo on the fridge in Queens. Tomorrow, if I walk along the hallway of that house, I will walk like the one who holds the keys, not an overnight guest. Reggie turned another page, his voice still even. Anyone who publicly insults Ms. Ava will have their family fund allowance stopped. Not a revenge line, I thought, but a new fence so that words know to take responsibility for themselves. And finally, all other prenups are void. The word void fell onto the wooden floor, smashing no one, only gathering the shards of a forced signing game amid the crowd. The room shifted slightly. The coordinator whispered to change the seating, pushing my mother's chair to the front row. A busser set the napkin neatly before her. Ethan stepped half a step forward, his gaze as if shedding a weight from his chest. As for Vivian, for the first time, she couldn't find a quip. Her smile stalled as if tripping. Reggie looked up at the audience, then gently took from the envelope a USB. The notary confirmed. The screen in the corner was turned on. In a dark wood-paneled office, Mr. Henry appeared. An old yet bright face, speaking to Reggie, his voice hoarse but clear. That girl has the heart our family needs. I did not feel myself being granted favor. I saw an old man believing that kindness also needs to be bound in black and white, so it won't be pressed down by someone. Montage in the night went by like a strip of film, the thud of the seal, signatures gliding under the light, the notary closing the ledger, the lawyer nodding in confirmation, staff changing the name cards on the table, the band testing a few jazz notes again, my mother holding my hand, her hand warm like the grassy bank in Central Park on a windy afternoon. I stood still, the feeling not of turning the tables, but of resetting the balance for a one-legged table that had been propped unevenly. I took the mic, not letting victory make me noisy. Thank you everyone for waiting, I said, my voice as ordinary as when I call my students to reading time. Tonight, I learned one more thing. Dignity doesn't need to shout. It only needs enough paperwork, enough witnesses, and enough calm to open the right envelope. I looked around, saw a few eyes soften. Reggie closed the folio. The notary put away the seal. I let my shoulders drop, like putting down a backpack worn too long. The night was still that same night, but the table surface was flat. And in the new seat, right in the front row, my mother was smiling, a smile that placed me back into the right life of my own. When the murmurs had just subsided, a staff member opened the side door. The sound of wheels rolling on the wooden floor rang softly. The country club staff bowed and then pushed Henry amid the blue hydrangeas. The band paused a beat as if holding its breath. The whole room rose at once. I saw his silver hair shining under the lights, his eyes smiling before the corners of his mouth. He asked for the microphone, his voice warm, without strain. Ava, Central Park. Thanks to you, I am still alive to attend my grandchild's wedding. A few forks froze in midair, the gazes turned entirely toward me, no longer prying, but as if retrieving something that had been dropped. My heart remembered the smell of damp grass. The 1, 2, 3 count of an old afternoon, suddenly felt at peace. Vivian hurried over, her neck stiffening. Dad, I just wanted to protect the assets. Her voice was crisp like a glass, but with a crack. Henry placed his hand on the side of the wheelchair, weighing each word, not angry, but resolute. Ava, thank you. In this country, wealth is for doing kind things, not for humiliating. He nodded slightly to the notary and Reggie, as if confirming that what had just been read was a fence standing upright. Respect, clarity, and sealed. Then he looked straight at me, at my mother. I owe the two of you an apology for what has happened tonight. From now on, this table must have enough seats for everyone's dignity. As if on cue, the coordinator invited my mother to the front row, changed the name card, and placed a small bouquet in front of her. That gesture was so ordinary as to be unassailable, and therefore radiant. I heard the whispers recoil like waves hitting a breakwater. Those who had just been laughing suddenly focused on straightening their napkins. Reggie stepped back a pace, his hand still on the leather notebook, his eyes gentle yet steady like a gatekeeper of the truth. Ethan stepped to my side. He asked for the microphone, took a breath, turned toward the rows of seats. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm sorry for letting you have to sit in the last row, for not standing by Ava when it was needed. From tonight, I will stand here." He set the microphone down, stood close at my shoulder, his hand finding my hand slowly, without show. In him I saw not belligerence, but a gentle yet decisive choosing of sides. The room switched sides, not out of fear, but because they had just been shown the way. The boundary between power and kindness lies in how one treats the weakest. Vivian moved her lips, then was silent. Henry closed his eyes for a second, as if setting down a stone burden on his chest. He said to the staff, "Please, everyone, have dinner, and from now on, in this house, anyone who humiliates others will have no share in my trust." Without raising his voice, that sentence still traveled across the whole room like a light switched on. The band returned with a few gentle jazz notes. Someone pulled out a chair for my mother. She smiled, her eyes telling me to sit down. I sat, feeling as if I had just set a heavy backpack down on the floor, my shoulders suddenly light. I did not feel that I had defeated anyone. I felt I had returned to my proper place, the one who keeps her voice, the one who sets the chair straight for self-respect. I squeezed Ethan's hand once, nodded to Reggie, bowed my head slightly toward Henry. Tonight, if anyone loses face, it is arrogance breaking itself before the light. As for me, I only learned one more thing. When truth enters in a wheelchair, it is still strong enough to lift the whole room to stand upright. The room settled like a deep breath. The notary stepped forward, checked the USB. The screen lit up. Mr. Henry in a dark wood-paneled office, his voice low and clear, reading his final words for the family. She opened the ledger, compared the signature. The seal appeared on the screen. Then she nodded to confirm. The will video is valid. The signature is Mr. Henry's. The stamp struck the tabletop. Thud. Once more, simple and decisive. The family attorney approached, opened a stack of papers clipped with a silver fastener. According to the priority clause in the marriage settlement that was previously signed and notarized, any document forced into signing against the spirit of respect, including the prenup just now, is void. He spoke slowly, not adding a single drop of acrimony. I saw a few shoulders in the room lower. Like the final taut string had just been loosened. The coordinator turned on the speakerphone. On the line was a member of the Family Foundation Council, a calm yet unmistakable voice. "We have reviewed Clause 3, the rule on respectful conduct in all related ceremonies. From this moment, allowance for anyone who violates it will be suspended until there is a public apology. The rule applies to everyone, no exceptions." The room was dead silent, only the sound of the air conditioner and the soft rustle of pages. The person on the line paused for a beat, as if to give everyone enough time to understand. Rules do not take sides. They stand on the side of what has been signed. I glimpsed Vivian closing her eyes, both hands clenching together, pride sliding off her face like a layer of broken powder. The notary passed the ledger to me and Ethan. The ink in the pen was new, the weight in the hand just right. "Please, you two," she said, gentle like an aunt in the family. I inhaled slowly. In the corner of the room, my mother nodded at me, Reggie stood half a pace away, still keeping his hand on the leather notebook. Henry leaned back in his chair, his eyes bright as if he had set a brick in the right place. I signed my name, each stroke like rewriting a pledge, to treat people kindly, to keep my voice, to not let shame borrow the crowd as a weapon. Ethan signed beside me, his hand trembling slightly then steadying, as if relearning the stance of a decent man. The camera panned slowly, close up on the signatures and the seal. There were no fireworks, no cheers, only paper, ink, and a silence that had finally found its seat. The lawyer closed the ledger, read clearly. The post-nuptial trust is in effect. The announced terms will be enforced immediately. The air in the room changed color, not dazzling, but clear. The bussers discreetly cleared away the old prenups like clearing excess tissues from the table. Somewhere came the sound of a spoon lightly touching the rim of a glass, reminding everyone to return to dinner. But now, no one hurried. Everyone seemed to want to memorize this feeling, when something right is put in the right place. I took the microphone. My voice carried just enough, not high, not trembling. Thank you for waiting. Tonight I learned that justice is not the sound of applause when someone is humiliated. Justice here is the seal and the minutes, not the applause. I looked around, saw eyes drawing back their heat, giving room to clarity. Henry smiled, as light as dropping a pebble from a pocket. Ethan squeezed my hand. Reggie closed the folio. And I, among so many faces that had just gone through a shared lesson, suddenly felt my heart as calm as a lake after the wind. Flat, clear, and deep enough to reflect a new promise for the life ahead. 1 year later, mornings in Queens still open with the sound of trains gliding past and slanting sunlight on the classroom window, only different in that my schedule has one steady line added: Sterling Foundation, co-chair meeting. I step into the foundation's headquarters with the old tote bag, then return to school with a new plan board. STEM for city kids. The children in my neighborhood get to touch their first robot kit. The motor hums softly. The LED lights blink like a nod. I kneel down at eye level, say, "Let's try again," and see them smile, patient like little engineers. In the afternoon, the schoolyard is cool, the phone camera set on a stand. Henry is at home, sitting in front of the screen, watching the classroom live stream. He occasionally leans close to the speaker to hear the robots beep, like listening to the heartbeat of a new story. When a group makes the robot go straight across the chalk line, he gives a thumbs up with a gentle smile, and I seem to hear a "well done" echo across the network. On weekend evenings, the backyard smells of BBQ. Ethan wears an apron, awkward yet cheerful, flipping skewers to soft music. Neighbors drop by. The kids run around the chalk line, eye drawn to a mini robot racetrack. My mother sits in a folding chair holding a plate of fruit, watching like she used to watch me practice walking. On days when the wind shifts, Ethan brings out a coat to put on my shoulders, speaking softly, "Here, we are safe." I nod, thinking of the road we have taken. No more whispers of humiliation, only the clink of dishes, laughter, and the warm smell of coals. As for Vivian, she chose to stay instead of leaving. In a community workshop organized by the foundation, the hall is set with round chairs. Parents, teachers, the staff of that country club from that year are also present. In front of the camera set in the corner, she stood up, held the microphone with both hands, spoke slowly and clearly. I apologize to Ava. I apologize to Ava's mother for the things I said and the way I acted. I forgot that respect is the foundation. There was no burst of applause, only slight nods. Then the program continued. A digital skills class for parents, a repair toys corner for children, a scholarship counseling table. I sat in the back row, thanked in my heart. Sometimes an apology doesn't need adornment. It just needs to stand in the right place. When night falls, I open the computer to review the whole day, stitch short clips into a montage. The first robot rolls across the line. Henry smiles at the screen. Ethan flips meat under string lights. Vivian greets parents after the class. And I write thank you letters to those who sent old kits for the class. I think, best revenge, living well. I did not marry into an empire. I built a decent family. The real contract is not just paper. It is the clause of respect. And respect, once it has a seat, will teach everyone how to speak more softly to hear each other more clearly. Do you believe butler power can change an entire room? Thank you for staying here with me up to this point. Please like. If you stand with Ava, comment butler. If you also resonate with those things, before leaving, please give me one channel subscription because they are free. Thank you and see you in the next videos.